She is the key to what once was a meme team to run. She wasn't what pioneered it, but she was the one that fulfilled its potential. Yelan is an interesting unit that draws many comparisons to Chen. However, just like how a certain fox lady was compared to the Night Raven, that is not all there is to this story. This is an analysis of Yelan's kit and how she finally unlocked double Hydro supremacy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening YouTube, it's your Slime King, the Jima Man, and welcome to another video. Before we begin, let me preface everything by saying that all of this is in the context of a C0 Yelan. Let's first look at how Yelan's kit comes together as a whole. Her passive, talent, turn control, allows some leeway in building HP substats as it increases her max HP by up to 30%. But in practice, as we will get into later, it is much like Yunjin's talent and it becomes just good to have and not something you build around. Her second passive talent, Adapt with Ease, is basically what sets her apart from Chen. This gives whoever is on field up to 50% damage bonus. Obviously, you won't be getting that much throughout the entire duration of her burst, but it's still a lot of damage that solidifies her role as a buffer. Her normal attack string, while it looks cool, is unremarkable. What really sets this talent apart is Breakthrough Barb. When she enters that state, which can be triggered either from spending 5 seconds out of combat or triggering it with a lifeline proc, your next charge attack will have decreased charge time and deal up to 20% of her max HP. This mechanic allows Yelan to switch up her rotations depending on what is needed for the situation, or it can be totally ignored. Her skill, Lingering Lifeline, allows her to move rapidly and deal damage to anybody she has tagged in the process. This produces 3 to 4 Hydro Particles that can be pre-funneled to your burst as you are casting it. This is a no-nonsense skill that scales off her max HP and gives her energy particles. The twist with this skill is everyone marked by the lifeline will give a 34% chance to reset her Breakthrough Barb. Essentially, you only need 3 enemies to guarantee a reset, and makes her even better in AoE situations depending on how you play your rotations. We'll get into that later. Her burst, depth, clarion dice is probably the sole reason why she is compared so much to Chen. Nevertheless, her burst creates an exquisite throw that deals 3 instances of damage that applies 1 U of Hydro per wave. This makes her a decent enabler for vape teams, but as most videos you've watched have probably told you, it's not enough Hydro for Hu Tao teams. Her talents as a whole make her a very versatile unit that fully scales off of HP. Pair that with her crit rate ascension stat and building her becomes easier than most characters. Her role in a team is relatively simple. 1. She deals damage. 2. She applies Hydro. Those are 2 things that are very valuable in the game right now. And to top it all off, she also provides a hefty damage bonus the longer Exquisite Throw is in play. Her drawback against her most compared unit, Chen, is that she lacks the survivability of Chen rain swords. This is more of an ode to how saturated Chen kit is with utility rather than a shot at Yelan. They are very similar units, however there are points where I'd want Yelan over him. But before we talk about that, let's talk about running Yelan with another Hydro first. The more popular in the list of other Hydro units to run is with Chen. And there's a good reason for this. Yelan and Chen allow for unparalleled Hydro application. They deal a crap ton of damage off field, and they enable vape carries to shine even more. And the cherry on top of all of this is that you can run less energy on both of them. Chen can rock a Mist-Player, a Jade Cutter, or a Lion's Roar, and Yelan can get away with running significantly less ER. They feed into each other so well that it makes so much sense to run them. And then there's another pairing of double Hydro with Yelan and Kokomi. I've ran Kokomi with Chen in teams before, and they were all very good but never amazing teams. So naturally I'd want to pair Kokomi with Yelan because it presents an even better proposition than that. You see, Yelan pumps even more damage than Chen ever will, and in a team with Kokomi as the on-field enabler, you do not need more utility from Chen rain swords. You can even take that one step further and run triple Hydro, Yelan, Kokomi, Chen within a Nemo unit. This team would allow you to spec all of these energy-hungry units into damage instead of focusing on ER substats. And the result is Hydro reigning supreme. It is apparent that Yelan further strengthens the synergy of running multiple Hydro units, even if Hydro Resonance is all but useless. And with her teams, it should be obvious by now that Resonance is not worth building your teams around, and instead build teams around the synergies they have with each other. One last note, Ayato and Child can also work with Yelan, provide more damage on field than Kokomi. However, you lose out on comfiness, and if you can play with that, then they are also very good options. While Barbara and Mona can go suck it. So what about running her as a lone Hydro in a team then? This puts her in direct competition with Xinqiu. However, having a second Xinqiu means that you can run her in another team in the Abyss, and that's always a good thing. But let's explain her role as a lone Hydro in a team then. In recent times, the most comparable situation Yelan finds herself in is with Yae Miko. Yae Miko was instantly compared to Fisher the day she came out. In fact, many people were saying that she was just a 5-star official, and to a certain extent, the same can be said for Yelan. Both these 5 stars role are very similar to the 4 stars, and Yae Miko is better off played with Fischl to cover up her energy woes. The difference is Yelan is less dependent on another Hydro on the team and more self-sufficient than Yae Miko. Running 200% ER will solve most of her woes, and having a Fab holder will also make it more comfy. As a lone Hydro, she performs more or less the same role as Xinqiu's, but worse in some scenarios and better in others. Most notably, her Hydro application is just not enough for Hu Tao and her teams, because Xinqiu applies 2 instances of Hydro every time his C6 procs, which give him the advantage there. Yelan's advantage then becomes when she is slotted into teams that want more damage than utility and don't need as much Hydro application. As for the meta, her best teams right now involve running her and Xinqiu together. The team making rounds is Fina Rational, a team consisting of Yelan, Hu Tao, Xinqiu, and Xiangling. This team reverse vapes both Xiangling's and Hu Tao's pyro attacks. That's thanks, in large part, to the overwhelming Hydro application of Yelan and Xinqiu. Rotations are relatively simple and is a strong contender in Hu Tao teams. Yelan also fits into Taser teams just as well as Xinqiu. However, she becomes worse if you rely on Xinqiu's damage interruption, resistance, and healing. She can also be used in freeze teams with Ayaka to great effect. And I told you, having a second Xinqiu but specializes not only in damage but also buffing will always be good in terms of meta. However, the real compelling argument to Yelan is that she enables more offshoot non-meta teams than Xinqiu. For example, in Kraizuha, Yelan is better simply because she provides a hefty damage bonus while also dealing more damage herself. You don't have enough damage in some floors of the Abyss, and this is where Yelan shines the most. In TF Kazuha teams, she presents a compelling reason to use as this team often lacks damage in single target situations. In Kokomi Taser, she is just flat out better to use simply because Kokomi can just out-heal everything, rendering Xinqiu's utility useless. In Xiao teams, where you run Yelan, Yujin, and Zhongli, there is a compelling argument to use Yelan because of her buff during Exquisite Throw, and the fact that you can spam N1 Punch to trigger her Exquisite Throw consistently, and the same cannot be said about Xinqiu's Burst. And of course, there's Thunder and Fury Yelan teams that are the most fun to run, in my opinion. If you're interested in that, card will be linked up top. Lastly, in Klee teams with Xinqiu and Yelan, it actually allows Klee to reverse vape everything that can be reverse vaped even if her burst is up, which, if you've been around a while, is absolutely mind-boggling. As for rotations, I've brought up Breakthrough Bar before, and for most of her meta teams, this can be wholly ignored because you want to maximize uptime for her burst. This is very applicable in vape teams where you want to be vaping the entirety of Hu Tao's kill duration or Xiangling's Pyronado. Where Breakthrough Bar becomes a little more useful is when you want to use it in AoE situations. If it is a mobbing floor with more than 4 enemies, the consolidated damage of a Breakthrough Barb will far outweigh the single target damage of an Exquisite Throw. Lastly, you can just use it when you have downtime in your rotations, which happens because either you messed up the rotation, don't have energy recharge to burst again, or the burst cooldowns did not line up. Aside from that, her skill order is relatively simple. Just remember to E then Q to funnel particles, and when you are running her with Xinqiu must be the one to burst first because his burst is 18 seconds, while Yelan's is 15. In some teams like Fina Rational, that synced up timing of their bursts matter. And also, doing a second E in your rotation heavily decreases your ER requirements. I like to touch on weapons and builds for a brief moment before I finish with my final thoughts. Her best in slot is obviously Aqua Simulacra. Even if you have to run an energy recharge Sans, it is still the best weapon choice for her. Unless you run her as a support to a vape unit, in which case Elegy for the end becomes her best choice. The energy recharge subset and the EM it gives is just too enticing of a proposition for her. Any other 5-star would be good on her as long as you have the prerequisite ER stats to burst off cooldown. Her best 4-star options are in this order: Fav Warbow, Fading Twilight, Sack Bow, Viridescent Hunt, and Stringless. Fav Warbow is just too good, especially at high refines. This reduces her ER significantly. Sack Bow is less of a priority, unlike with Sincho, simply because it is too much on-field time, and Yelan's E already takes longer to perform, and not to mention her Q lasts 3 seconds less than Rain Cutter. If you can't tell by now with her weapons, ER is very important, especially if you run her as a lone Hydro in a team. She needs at least 195% ER to burst off cooldown, and even more if you run ER decrepit teams. With another Hydro, that ER requirement dips down to around 160, and with Hydro and Fav on the team, that requirement dips down to around 140. Her best artifact set is Emblem. While TOM and 2 HOD is good, Emblem is just simply better as her burst is a majority of her damage anyway. One can make the case to run her as a forward vape carry, vaping her charge attack and her E, making the 2 TOM and 2 HOD more compelling. However, it is harder to pull up rotations in those teams, making them not recommendable aside from the memes. Yelan is a good unit. She is more worthy than her 5-star Sincho moniker makes her out to be. She is a versatile unit with her own distinct advantages. Her kit is cohesive and feels very fluid to play. Her E feels impactful. Her burst feels impactful. She doesn't break any new ground, but just like the Hydro unit that came before her, Ayato, she is perfectly balanced, and she doesn't sway the scales in any which way. She is, much like most 5-star pulls, a side grade to the existing pool of characters we have. But if you don't have a C6 Sincho, or that many Hydro applicators in your account, she presents a very compelling reason to pull. She allows you to run several double Hydro teams, and by virtue of being Hydro, she will always hold value. How much value that is will always be up to you and not me. Tell me what you think down in the comments below, or better yet, come at me at twitch.tv/thejimaman, where I stream Genshin almost every day. Come, join the Slime Kingdom Discord where I feed you slime content every day. This is our parting. Farewell.